Hey guys, I want to welcome you to Tea Talks with Nubia, where we hold real, raw, and necessary conversations about love, relationships, and the journeys that shape us. In this 3-part series, we're going to dive into a topic that's often underrepresented, but is very important. We're going to talk about how to navigate toxic relationships and recognizing narcissistic behavior and addressing domestic violence in LGBTQIA relationships. Over the next 3 episodes, we'll explore the red flags of toxic relationships, the emotional roller coaster of trying to leave behind a harmful partner, and the resources available to those in need of support. Healing begins with acknowledgement, and in this space, we'll create a safe space and a dialogue to encourage strength, empowerment, and self-awareness. So grab your tea, get cozy, and let's have a heart-to-heart conversation that could change lives. Okay. We're diving into an important yet overlooked issue in the LGBTQ plus community. Narcissism, domestic abuse, and toxic relationships are topics that need to be discussed. Specifically, we'll touch base on how these dynamics play out in relationships, specifically lesbian relationships. We often think of toxic relationships in the heterosexual content, but they can play out and be just as prevalent in lesbian and gay relationships. Allow me to introduce my first guest, author, journalist, and my friend, Josie Pickens. Josie is a Black queer womanist professor, a culturalist, and an organizer whose many works explore the intersections of race, gender, and sexuality. Josie, thank you so much for being here on Tea Talks with Nubia.
I'm so excited to be here with you. I know that these conversations are difficult conversations. We're going to be talking about some challenging topics, but I'm really happy to be here exploring those things with you. And they're much, much needed conversations in our community.
Exactly. Well, this tea time is turning into a wine down. Hey. So let's get into it. So for our first topic, we're going to talk about emotional abuse and recognizing the signs, because this is actually where it begins. And Josie, I know you deal a lot with youth as well as adults in the LGBTQIA space. And I know that abuse is a topic of discussion, especially amongst LGBTQIA youth. When it comes down to emotional abuse, I want to break down some of the signs, because I think what is going to resonate a lot with you guys at home is what it looks like, what it feels like, what it sounds like. And I think that's the most important part, right? So you can identify that something isn't quite right with what's happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the first ones I want to mention is criticism. Criticism is that thing that makes you feel like you're the problem, right? It's like you can't do anything right. It's like they always got an issue centered around something you said, did, or didn't do. Can you talk to me a little bit about what criticism looks like in a toxic relationship?
So I think, first of all, we have to go back and talk about the fact that, if we're honest, so many of us were groomed for abuse in our childhoods. When we experience emotional abuse, physical abuse, emotional neglect, all of these things, it really kind of primes us to be more accepting of those types of behaviors in our adult relationships, right? So I think that even for me, as someone who has experienced emotional neglect and emotional abuse in relationships, it has been so good for me to go through a therapeutic process to figure out, where were the seeds planted for this? Because what told me that it was okay for someone to treat me this way?
Or talk to me this way.
Handle me this way. And a lot of times, unfortunately, we have to do the work of reflecting back on when those patterns began.
So what we're going to do is we're going to start with emotional abuse. And the reason why we're starting with emotional abuse is because there's levels to abuse. And 9 times out of 10, it starts with the emotional standpoint. So we're going to talk about how to recognize the signs of emotional abuse. And I think the first one we're going to start with is criticism, because that can be outright or very subtle. And so when we have someone that we're dating, even friendship, this is not simply
Oh,
around
absolutely.
just
All
dating.
relationships.
All relationships.
It can happen in the
platonic and romantic.
workplace.
That too. I never even thought
Yeah.
about that. So we're going to talk about criticism and what that looks like and what it can look like. So that way you're able to recognize the signs when something just doesn't feel right and you can't necessarily put a finger on it. But what ends up happening is you start to make excuses for it.
Oh, absolutely. I think, the source of it all is to create confusion and self-doubt, right? So what better way to do that than to begin with like these subtle criticisms? Like, oh, I really like your hair this particular way, or, oh, I really don't like that lipstick, or, oh, well, I'm thinking about this project that you're working on, and I really don't understand why you're doing that.
Yeah.
Or I don't understand why I understand this is your dream, but I don't get it.
Yeah.
Like these types of things that seem like very subtle and just like, oh, a way to open up dialogue and communication. That's where it begins. And then it turns into
more.
But
let's start with just the criticisms and what that looks like, right?
Yeah.
So you gave some examples. For me, what I hear it is somewhat envious, right? It's small envy things like it's almost like you can't do anything right. It's almost like everything you do, say, or don't say sometimes is an issue.
Right.
Who your friends are, what you're wearing, how you're dressed, your hair, your makeup, anything. And don't get me wrong, there is healthy criticism out there, but from a person that you care about, especially if we talk specifically about romantic relationships, I think there's a way of just appreciation and loving the person that you're getting to know, right?
Absolutely.
And not nitpicking. It almost feels like nitpicking.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It is this kind of like nitpicking, and it is designed to chip away at your self-esteem and your sense of self, right?
Yeah.
And so that is once those criticisms steep in to you, then it opens you up for more, as we discussed earlier. But like all of the things that you mentioned are pathways to that. And it just becomes worse and worse to the point where you're like, well, I can't do anything right. It seems that everything that I have to say, everything that I am, the way that I look, the way that I behave, the way that I speak to people or don't speak to people, the connections that I do or don't have, all of this, all of a sudden is an issue for this person,
Correct.
right? So then, after a while, it's like you feel like you're walking on eggshells.
That part. And we're going to talk about this in levels because, again, it starts with the basic, and the basics typically start with criticism. The next step, I would say, is accusations. Start creating narratives that you're doing something when you're not actually doing it.
Right. This is like gaslighting.
It's a part of gaslighting, right?
We'll
I think gaslighting is another level.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But even just minimal accusations, like, where are you going and who's that? You never mentioned them before. Is this somebody that, and it's like, whoa, it's just my friend, or,
right.
You know what I mean? And I personally used to write this stuff off as insecurity.
Yeah.
And not looking at it as a sign of toxicity.
Right. Because we all experience insecurities. And when we know that we're new in relationship, we understand that like, oh, if someone is getting to know me, maybe they don't understand the way that I connect with people. And that could feel to someone like, oh, there is this certain level of like, attention that I might be giving other people that seems romantic, even though it's just a part of my personality to be talkative or communicative with people, right? So like those types of accusations, which then again are making you doubt yourself. So now you're thinking, okay, am I acting inappropriately?
How do I reassure? How do I give reassurance?
To
this person.
Because I really want this person to know that, hey, I'm here and I'm interested in you and this is what I want. And so a lot of times we are just looking to soothe people's insecurities because we recognize and understand that everybody has insecurities. And I think particularly for women like you and me, who are public people, who know a lot of people, who move in a certain way in the world, we do recognize that a lot of people who may not be in that, walk with that same energy, will feel have a lot of questions.
Correct.
When we begin relationship. Correct. And so that's the danger, right? Of like, what I've learned is that any insecurities, whether they are just like the natural insecurities that we all have, or like headed towards emotional abuse, need to be addressed, and in a kind way and in a gentle way, but like really asking questions around those types of accusations.
So that's a great point, right? Because what do you feel are healthy ways to addressing the criticisms and the accusations before we even get to the third step, which is verbal abuse?
I think that instead of, and as women, we are taught to soothe, right? And so our first reaction is to soothe that insecurity, or what we feel might be an insecurity, or what we feel is like this accusation towards us. Oh, but it's not like that. Like, it's, instead of saying, I'm very curious. I noticed that when we're out in certain spaces and you see me mixing and mingling, you seem to, like, your energy changes. Like, I think we should talk about that. I need you to understand this about me. And if that is something that, bothers you, like, let's think more deeply about how we're getting. Yeah, like, let's unpack that. Let's think more deeply about that. And then the reassurance can come. But plant the question first and see what their reaction to that question is.
Yeah, that's true.
Because I think it disarms abusers, right?
Because they don't know how to respond.
Because abusers operate in spaces of confusion. So when you ask clarifying questions, it throws them off, right? Because now it's like, nobody's ever...
Can you say that one more time? Abusers?
Yes, abusers operate in spaces of confusion.
All right, so we gave you guys 2 steps so far. It's criticism, and then it moves on to accusations. The third step would be verbal abuse. And the verbal abuse is very much outright. It's very much like, I can't stand you I can't stand when you do this, and just really putting you down, belittling, straight calling you names. Do you have any other examples of like what verbal abuse can look like? Because I was told one time to shut up, and I was like, what? I don't talk to people like that. Like, that's not the language that I use. If you're doing too much, I could be like, goodness, is it possible for you to tone it down, or maybe you're too loud? But shut up to me is verbal abuse. I'm just like, don't talk to me in that tone.
I don't accept that. Yeah. I don't accept that. And I think that a thing to remember is that some people are so desensitized to that type of verbal communication that they don't even recognize it as abuse.
Are they desensitized because of their upbringing? Is that what you're saying? Like,
I think so. A lot of times our upbringing, just our worldview and the worlds that we have lived in. So either something that we experienced in our childhoods, something that was modeled for us that we saw, the communities that we are a part of sometimes in our friendships, sometimes the way that we're seeing family interact with each other, even if it isn't direct parent and child, like all of these things create our worlds.
Yes.
And if in your world, you're around a bunch of people who curse each other out, call each other names, tell each other you ain't shit,
it seems normal.
Even
though it doesn't feel good.
Yeah. Or we become desensitized to it. I tell people all of the time, I believe in being treated with softness. because I try to offer softness to the world, you're not going to handle me any kind of way, and you're not going to talk to me. That offends me. I don't even play like that.
And that's, I believe, the part of this conversation that I want people to understand is that you advocate for yourself. You are your own advocate, and you have to start at those first 2 stages. Just observe, recognize, like,
and be curious. Ask questions.
Put bookmarks in it. Ask the questions, but definitely put that in the back of your head. Like, okay,
yeah,
verbal abuse is a no. Like, you're not going to speak to me like this, and that's the first sign, right? But what ends up happening, because I'll be honest with you, for my situation, that was the start. It was the start. It started with verbal abuse. All the rest of the stuff wasn't there. It started with, like, why is your tone off? Why is your energy like that? Like, what's going on? And a lot
of times it's abrupt, right?
It'll come out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere.
And I was just like, what the hell is going on? Because I don't know what triggered that, right? And then it was the I'm sorries, right? I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I had a rough day, or I'm stressed, or all of the reasons.
Right. And in the beginning, you take those apologies to heart, because a lot of times people who are abusers figure out how to not show up in that way, at least in the beginning. So when they have these moments of, like, the switch up, again, confusion. And so you're like, well, wait, let me give this person grace. And they're apologetic. You know, this is before the apologies. It's like, you're apologizing to me 10 times a day at this point.
Yeah.
Because you have no emotional regulation. You are disrespectful in the way that you speak to me. And then it just escalates from there. But, like, in the beginning, those apologies seem sincere. And again, we want to give people grace. Absolutely. A lot of times, another thing the abusers will do is give you this sad backstory.
Talk about it. I know.
This sad backstory that
makes you just want to love on them and be like, it's okay.
Yeah.
I'm a safe space.
Yeah. I know you're over here abusing me, but I also recognize that hurt people hurt people. You know, we love to say that, right? Yeah. And that may be true, but it ain't right. You know what I mean? And, like, making sure that we are having the most compassion for ourselves in relationships. Like, that is something that the Buddha would say, right? Like, compassion starts with self. Before we can give compassion to others, we have to have compassion for ourselves.
Yeah.
So if we are being mishandled and mistreated and talked too crazy, we have to take inventory of, like, how that makes us feel and be in touch with how that makes us feel. Recognize that we don't deserve that and address it.
And addressing it is speaking up.
It's speaking up. It's speaking up. Is if we're interested in moving forward, asking those curious conversations, or for some people, that's the line.
And I believe that verbal abuse should be the line. I have to be honest with you, because the next steps from verbal abuse, it just gets worse.
Right. And I also believe that it's a grooming that is happening each step of the way. Yeah.
So how much more can I?
Yeah, like, oh, I'm testing this person to see how much abuse they will take.
Yeah, they
right?
will endure.
So it starts with the criticism. Oh, I see this very confident, beautiful, accomplished woman allowing me to chip away at her. So let me see what else I can do. And then after criticism comes, like, those accusations. Because the abuser knows, like, this woman is not doing these things that I'm accusing her of, or this person is not doing these things that I'm accusing them of. So, like, oh, that's another yes. They're accepting this behavior that is inappropriate from me, right? And then when we move on to verbal abuse, at this point, I'm cursing you out. And all I got to do is say, baby, I'm sorry. You know, my mama, my daddy, all my exes, nobody ever believed in me like
the way you do.
Nobody ever loved me like this.
You do, and all of
and
the
I just
things.
don't know what to do with it. And instead of us being like, that sounds like a you problem and not a me problem, go and talk to the lady and come back and see me maybe after you've done some soul searching and some healing. So again, we are showing this person, this is one more step towards abuse.
Yeah.
And this is how we end up with physical abuse, right? Because we are being groomed for it.
We're almost there. So we're going to go on to, we're now going to stage 4. So we touch base on 3 different, I would say, emotional abuse techniques that abusers do start with. One is criticism. The second is accusations. And the third is verbal abuse. Now that we've made it to those 3 levels, we're going to move on to the last 3 levels, which are the most heinous, toxic ones. And so we're going to do number 4. And number 4 is going to be rages. The mood swings that come out of nowhere, the acting out, the yelling, the name calling, and just like, whoa.
Where is this coming from?
Where is this coming from?
How did this happen?
How did this happen?
Yeah.
And why is this happening? And I have to say, a lot of you that are watching this Tea Talks know that I went through a domestic abuse altercation in Mexico back in August with someone that I was dating. And this is the stage that I got to. And a lot of you seen the video of the rage.
Yeah.
I didn't show the actual abuse because that is just not
right.
It's not for anybody to watch. But it happened. And I was like, what is happening?
Right.
And why is this happening?
And who is this person?
And who is this person? Like, it was a straight, like, rage attack out of nowhere. And all of the things that came out of her mouth were jealousy, envy, hatred. And I was just like, why is this happening? And who are you?
Right.
And it can happen at any time, at any place, anywhere.
Yeah.
It's not a rhyme or reason. And it's something that you can't always account for because it just happens.
And a lot of times, especially when we're getting to know someone and we're new to the relationship, like, we don't recognize that people are pretending and performing. They are performing sweetness and peace and like all of these things that attract us, right? But what really is sitting at the root of that, when people don't do their work to heal, is that kind of rage, right? Once we get to know folks and we move stronger into the relationship, it's more difficult to hide all of the parts of us that we see as like unsavory.
Yeah.
And that's when that rage comes up. And just like a lack of emotional regulation and control.
Yeah. You use that word a lot, which I like. And I will say, that with every account and every stage, there is a level of discernment that we have within ourselves. That's that gut feeling. That's that intuitive self that we all have that says something isn't right here. 9 times out of 10, we see the anger, but it's never directed towards you. Sometimes it's directed towards mommy issues, daddy issues, family, friends,
an ex-partner. That's something that is something to watch out for, is to realize that you are never above, right? So we should look at the way that this person treats and interacts, talks about other people in their life. I have been in a relationship with someone who didn't have any strong connections and ties, like challenges in family, challenges in friendships, could not have any even cordial relationships with exes.
It was woe is me all the way around.
And also, it's like, everybody is terrible, recognizing that sometimes the common denominator is that person, sometimes the common denominator is us. But yeah, it's like, if you're seeing this person have these unsavory relationships, this lack of emotional regulation and control with other people, just know that your turn is coming. I think a lot of times one of the reasons that we overlook what our guts are telling us is because we want to be the person to be different for this person.
Yeah.
Right? We want to be the person that loves them deeply and believes in them and like helps them through their hardships.
Loves
the
them through it
person
all.
that hasn't abandoned them and hurt them, you know? And so we make excuses for these fits of rage because also, just like with the verbal abuse, the apologies come after.
Yeah.
These passionate apologies that are almost as passionate as those fits of rage, right? So those fits of rage are explosive, and then the apologies and the what looks like love and care and repair after that is also like explosive and so full of like passion, right?
Yeah.
This gets us caught up in the push and pull.
Yes.
That often happens.
Let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard, specifically in lesbian relationships, women say, oh, I love me a woman that's like classy, but a little bit of crazy. And I'm just like,
oh, yes. Let me tell you something. I, as somebody who is an expert in love and relationships, I've been researching and writing about love and relationships for over a decade now. And the content that I see around relationships and relational behavior is frightening. And particularly like, you know, if you're going to the lesbian pages or like the influencers, and you'll see like all of this toxic, dysfunctional, abusive relationship behavior that is presented as like, comical. Oh, you know, this is cute.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I saw this thing the other day. It was like somebody is looking at their phone and it's a text from their partner, their girlfriend, and it's like, oh, baby, you called me, I was asleep. And the other person is like, oh yeah, I know you were asleep. And they're showing like on their TV screen, it's a video of the girl's bedroom because they are literally like stalking this person. And it's presented like, haha, you know what I mean? But like, that's not funny because that is something that actually happens. I have seen this sort of possessiveness that is like very easy to spot, very much become what is a natural part of like lesbian relationship. Yeah. I too have talked to lesbian women, femmes who are like, you know, hey, if I want somebody to know how to handle me. And by handle me, they don't mean support me, care for me, show up with respect, honor me, treat me like the goddess that I am. When they say handle me, they mean I want somebody that don't play about me. What does don't play mean? They might fight you. They might fight somebody else. They might all of this type of like toxic and dysfunctional behavior that we look at as, oh, this means that this person really cares about me because they'll, you know.
But with possession comes isolation, right? So you bring up possession. Isolation is also a level. And isolation comes with it's almost like attachment styles, right? So one of the things I do want to touch base on is the fact that know who you are innately, right? The self-awareness and how you respond to certain things. So there's the avoidant, and I believe it's the the anxious avoidant. And there's 5 in total, which I will pull up in a second. But my point to saying all that is that there are people who will try their best to isolate you from the people in your world because they want to be your everything. And no one person, not one, can be your everything. It it is an accumulation or, it is a makeup of the amount of people that you have in your world that fills your cup.
Right.
No one person should be able to be your sun, moon, and everything.
And I think that this can be a trap, particularly in lesbian relationships, because like what are the things that we say about lesbian relationships? U-Haul relationships, right? It's like as soon as we meet, we're falling in love. We're planning a future together. This is something that we normalize as part of lesbian relationships. So that kind of like rooting down and cocooning doesn't seem strange.
I don't think there's anything wrong with moving forward, right? I actually met a lesbian couple who met on like IG or something like that, social media. And within 4 months, they moved in together and now they're having their 2.5-year anniversary.
Exactly.
I believe people make choices.
Right.
In everything that we do. However, I also want to preface and I also want to say that everything that we're talking about isn't about new relationships. Sometimes you don't know who you're sleeping next to.
Oh,
that
absolutely.
movie, Sleeping with the Enemy type thing, that's a real thing. People have been in marriages for years.
Very true.
I mean, we got to be honest with ourselves. Ted Bundy had a whole family.
Oh,
and
yes.
His wife had no idea that he was a mass murderer.
This is
you know what I mean? People who are really battling, and this is all mental health issues.
Yeah.
I want you guys to understand this really has to do with mental health, and it can happen to anybody. An abuser is a normal person who is going through a lot of things and they are projecting their own anger and rage onto another, which causes the abuse. So that's to say that they are just like you and I, right? And at some point, maybe you are also an abuser. I mean,
absolutely.
I think we all have and also, like some kind
most abusers are victims of abuse themselves. You know what I mean? But like what you're saying about isolation, I think a way to like question that and be curious about that, even if it is a relationship that, and I was speaking about like sometimes what makes us susceptible to normalizing things, but like even if you are in a new relationship, it's moving fast, but things are good. Those people are not going to try to isolate you. They are going to allow you to make space to be with friends.
Correct.
They are going to allow you to make space to be with family. They are going to allow you to work, to pursue your passions and interests. Like it isn't going to be someone in your ear making you feel as though you having space and time apart, you showing up in autonomy for yourself
is a problem. That's true.
And that's how you know. That is what you should be curious about, because you're right. Like I know people who, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who is in this new, loving, wonderful relationship, a gay man, and he's like, we met on a hookup app. This was not supposed to become a relationship, but it has blossomed into that. So I think that love can come in many ways, in many capacities. But what we have to look for and pay attention to is like, is this person allowing me to show up as my full self? And are they allowing me to continue to flourish as an individual?
Yeah.
Because what we want is not codependence. Right? We want interdependence. We want to be able to, like, I have my life, you have my life, and we create a shared life together.
I will say this, that when people are going through that about to hit rage stage, it masks itself as fear. I'm fearful of losing you. I'm fearful that I'm not enough. I'm fearful, or I'm afraid that, whatever it, like they make it seem like they're so afraid, and you're like, afraid of what? And that's when you start again.
Like you're making accommodations, right? Instead of saying, well, again, sometimes we just have to be. I've been having a lot of conversations lately where some folks are like, you just stone cold. But it's not that. It is like recognizing what I have the power to change and what I do not have the power to change. So if you feel insecure about where we are in our relationship and I am offering you affirmation and assurance, at some point that's a you problem.
Yeah.
And so it's recognizing when that like fear of like, I'm just afraid that I'm going to lose you. If I'm already affirming you and making sure that you understand that this is where I want to be, then at that point I recognize, oh, there's nothing that I'm going to be able to do
Because it's not enough for you.
to make you feel safe in this space.
Correct.
Because at the end of the story, a lot of work that we have to do around trust and safety is individual work. Now, it is work that we can do with a partner who is willing to begin therapy, a personal practice and a couples practice, right? Like, do the work to, because I think in these conversations, a lot of times it comes across as like, oh no, honey, don't deal with this and don't deal with that. Nobody is a perfect person. A lot of these things and behaviors that we're talking about, as we said, people who are abusers, people who have abusive behaviors, a lot of that is instilled in them. They have experienced it themselves. And we're not saying that you should just give up on everyone. Like, we are just saying that people have to be willing to recognize their challenges, their patterns that are unhealthy, and like come up with a real plan to heal and repair those things.
Absolutely.
Most times abusers are not doing that.
Absolutely. And like I said, you know, I'm a big believer of the yin and the yang, you know, the dark and the light. The dark does not exist without the light, nor does the light not exist without the dark.
Right.
And as we grow and as we get older, we all have come from some kind of toxic behaviors. I'm not going to lie.
Absolutely.
I had an attitude back in my 20s. And
we talked about this.
Even
we
in my
talked about
30s.
this. Like,
I mean, I've come a long way.
Right.
But, you know, it doesn't mean you have to stay there. However, what we're trying to do is just, you know, be able to show some of the signs that come with toxic behaviors, right?
Because here's the thing. We've talked about that even in the context of this relationship that you ended. You having grace for this person because of you recognizing, oh, I used to be hellfire. I used to be a problem. And I've changed, right? Yeah. But I think what you now understand is, yes, you changed, but you also had the will to change.
Correct.
Right? And you did the work to change.
And continue.
And continue, because we're all on that path.
Yeah.
There's no person who is healed.
At all. I hate when people say,
yeah,
I've done the work and I'm healed.
You are still doing the work. We are all still healing. And healing is not linear. At all. We be going back and forth, two-stepping like the Tamia Lime dance. Girl, trying to figure it out. So like, that's also a thing that we do, right? When we see someone who might be having challenges that we have also faced, we're like, oh, let me have a bit more patience and grace.
Yeah.
You know, and you recognize this now, like, oh, that person was not willing to be honest beyond apology, that moment of apology, right? But to be honest enough to really implement real change.
Well, the thing about it is, and if I was to use my situation and to be completely, utterly transparent, I seen all of these signs very early on, and I spoke on them very early on. And I was very clear very early on that they needed to seek therapy.
Right.
And we had one therapy session together, and I put it on the table for her to book another appointment, which she did not do. And those are the signs, right?
Yeah.
It's like, my thing is, I can only do but so much for you, but I'm not carrying this.
Yeah.
And I would honestly say, like, you need help because you have anger that doesn't have anything to do with me.
For sure.
But it's affecting me.
Yeah.
And I don't feel safe in this space.
That's it.
And when I said that, I should have used that statement alone to walk away.
Right.
But what I did was exactly what you said. I try to resonate with her pain and say, I get it. I have abandonment. I have mommy issues. I have, I've been there, done that. I know how it looks. I know how it feels.
Yeah. We call it trauma bonding.
That part. But what I didn't anticipate was that rage.
Yeah.
And the attack. Right? You don't anticipate that. I would have never thought that this person would have done that to me.
Absolutely.
I don't think we ever do think like that, but we're going to move on to the next thing, right?
Yes, for sure.
I'm holding off on one particular level because we're going to get into that next part of part 2, and that what is going to be a segue.
Yeah.
So we're going to jump over one and go right into the last one, which is the threats, the actual physical abuse. Okay? That is when, God willing, you're able to get out of it.
Yeah.
When I came out with my situation, the amount of people that have reached out and shared their Me Too stories, have shared their abuse stories from their husband, their wives, even their children.
Yeah.
Like, it was overwhelming. And they suffered in silence.
Yeah.
They suffered in complete silence. I sat on phone with strangers crying. Yeah. I sat on phone with strangers listening to them share their stories because they were like, thank you for speaking up.
Yeah.
I'm not alone in this. I felt so alone, and the one thing that I'm grateful for is that I do have this platform. I do have you guys, and being able to utilize my platform has helped me heal so much. Yeah. So much, because I'm not going to be silent about what happened to me. And it happened in such a short amount of time. Like, I knew of this person. I would never say I know this person.
Right.
I've known of this person.
Some
version of this person for 4 months before she attacked me.
Right. Yeah.
Craziness.
Yeah. Those threats, as I said earlier, like all of the other things are like these grooming steps, right? To see, okay, will she accept the verbal abuse? Oh, she's accepted these fits of rage. She's shown up with softness with me when I've had these bouts of rage. So now let me take this rage to the next level. Yeah. Right? And I'm speaking about this as though it's calculated. Every abuser is different. They have their own story of how they came to be abusers. And I am not saying that people are sitting down with manifestos on how they're going to hurt people.
I doubt that's how it happens.
No.
Yeah.
Even if they have, it's patterns. Our patterns are what turn into our lives. Yeah. Right? And so I just want to keep people to keep that in mind as we're speaking about this. I'm not saying that abusers have this written out playbook. Yeah. But they do practice these patterns, these dysfunctional, toxic patterns. And that can be seen as a playbook, right? Yeah. Because even though someone might not recognize that, I always show up in this same way in every relationship. Yeah. That doesn't mean that isn't happening.
And crazy thing is, with my situation, once I came out with my story, I don't know how many of you guys know this, but once I came out with my story, I was contacted by an individual who was also assaulted by my abuser. And when I spoke to her in great detail and length, we found out there was another woman who was also assaulted by my abuser and her abuser. And from there, we found out that this person assaulted and abused their ex-partner prior to her, who was her husband at the time. It has been a pattern in this person's life over and over and over again, dating back now 8 years that we can go back to.
That we know.
That we know of. 8 years worth of abusive behavior. And it goes to show that you never know, but there were signs, and I can't act like there weren't signs. And that's why we're doing this, right? because we want you guys to know the signs.
That's it.
And be able to use your own discernment on what to do when these signs start to appear.
Yeah.
So let's get into a little bit of what people can do in order to save themselves from even getting to
the physical threats
of violence.
Again, as I said earlier, it is going from confusion to clarity every single time. Because as I said, abusers thrive in confusion. Because when our brains are confused and going every which way, we aren't paying attention to red flags. Mm-hmm. We aren't paying attention to dysfunctional patterns of behavior. We're doubting ourselves, which is why the criticism in those early stages is entering that self-doubt and chipping away at our sense of self. Because I will tell you, I was talking to a friend earlier. I think I was in a relationship a couple of years ago that before that relationship, you could not have told me that I didn't love myself or value myself. Could not have told me that.
Talk to me.
Like, I think that I show up with confidence. I believe that I am a beautiful woman. I believe that I am accomplished. I believe that I have all of these wonderful things going for me.
Which you do.
And I'm also not afraid to say those things.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? I have wonderful friendships and relationships, have built this amazing community around me. So you cannot have told me. So, but what I've learned is that the way that we know how we love ourselves, how much we love ourselves and how much we value ourselves is not in what we project to the world. Mm-hmm. It's how we allow ourselves to be treated. So I was in a relationship where I do not recognize who I was in that relationship. Mm. I, to this day, cannot believe that I allowed someone to treat me in the way that this person treated me, you know? And that is when I had to come to terms with, oh, there's something going on here that I need to investigate and heal. And it's completely transformed my life.
Yeah.
You know? And so I think that to begin, we have to really ask ourselves the question, what are we accepting and allowing in all of our relationships? You know, that sometimes that starts with a parent. Sometimes that starts with a sibling. A toxic friendship, because we have those too. That's another series that we need to do. You know what I mean? It's not always romantic relationship. It's every relationship. How do we allow ourselves to be treated in our work environment, in our business environments? Like, all of these things come together. And so curiosity is the beginning. When you realize, like, oh, this person is like treating me in a certain way, is our first response to excuse, to propel somebody else's feelings above our own? Right? If that's our first inclination, we need to be curious about why that happens. Like, why do I have more compassion? I'm over here. This person has hurt my feelings. I am holding back tears. Why am I more concerned about how they're hurting in this moment than I'm concerned about how I'm hurting?
That's a great point. And I'm holding back tears right now because when this person came into my space, into my universe, I was practicing self-love.
Yes.
I was actively practicing self-love. And if you would have said the same thing to me, I'd have been like, nobody can tell me that I'm not this, that. And
are you crazy? Look at me. Look at me. Look at my life. Look at you.
Yes,
look at your life.
My life. I have created the life that I live, and I'm so blessed and live in abundance.
Yes.
And I just wanted to give this person a little taste of that, to say, this is what happiness looks like.
Right.
Because I have finally got to a point that I realized that my pursuit of happiness had to do with me.
Right.
And I had been on this journey to learn happiness, right?
Yeah.
And thinking it came from all of the things, when in actuality it came from within.
Yeah.
So,
and I remember this work. I was witness to this work.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important for us to recognize that healing is not linear. It moves all kinds of ways.
It does.
And even as we propel forward and we are doing the healing work, we are still sometimes open to unhealed people.
But we all have
and
cracks.
Unhealed behavior.
We all have cracks.
And every single person in the world. And so I think it's also important to give ourselves that grace.
Well, that's the thing that I sit with. I believe in my story is, how did this person get in? Because I was so quick to recognize stuff like this.
Oh yeah, you were like,
you
were in your stage.
I was in my
You were in your no stage.
So that's what I had to sit with and unpack with my therapist, is what was going on within me that allowed this person to interrupt and disrupt my world.
And you know what I think it is? Because I have dealt with this same thing. When you have a heart to serve and a heart to help people. I won't go into how Nubia and I met, but I was a complete stranger to her, and I reached out to her for help, and she did not hesitate to help me. When you have a heart of service and a humanitarian heart, as sad as it is in this world, it can make you susceptible to abuse. And, you know, as someone who knows you personally, that is what I see more than anything. And I also know I have had interactions with the person who abused you. We have had interactions all together. And we've had many conversations as you navigated that relationship. And I think what sits at the root of it is, how did this happen? Because you have a humanitarian heart, a heart that is built to love and serve. And, you know, one of the things that we have to learn when we have those kinds of hearts is that in order to continue to be open and loving and operate in this space of abundance and sharing that abundance, is like setting boundaries. Setting boundaries. I've had to learn that. I know that you are learning that. I'm still learning that. Also, figuring out how to not demote ourselves, our feelings, and our needs to care for someone else. Because again, when you have a heart of service, that seems natural. I'm supposed to be selfless, right? I told someone the other day, selfless, if that's what you're looking for, not your person. You know, but I literally entered an entire therapeutic journey because I was showing up in this selflessness and being open to giving. And I was choosing to be in relationship with people who could not reciprocate any of that.
Yeah.
So again, all of these things that we're talking about, if you're not curious about them, it sets you up for abuse. You know, like abusers look at that. Look for that heart of gold.
Because people have hit me up and they're like, you of all people, like, you're strong.
Because this one is a firecracker.
I'm a firecracker. I am. And I'm a fire sign. And I will light some shit up. But
also you are loving and caring.
Yes, but it also did come out of nowhere very quickly. Mm-hmm. But with that said, we're going to wrap up this first part. So we saved a conversation for last, and it's literally the level that is before abuse, actual hitting on someone, is gaslighting. And the reason why I saved gaslighting for last is because it's a great way to introduce narcissism. So for part 2 of this conversation, we will be speaking with relationship and sexpert Naquan Lewis. So we'll see you back for part 2.
please subscribe to my channel.